What do the Buffalo Bills need to figure out between now and cutdown day? I'm exploring that today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Well, folks, welcome in. I want to explore the critical decisions left for Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott in sorting out this initial 53-man roster for the 2024 season. And I thought about doing a roster projection, but I think there's just too much that we need to learn for me to realistically do that right now. First of all, there's a preseason game to play, and while the starters won't play, the backups will. And so it is an evaluation opportunity, but it's also another opportunity for players to get hurt. And so I wanted to pump the brakes on doing a projection today. I'll probably do one after the Panthers game because we just have more to learn. And that includes the injury status of several key players that could influence things as well. If they're going to be placed on injured reserve now or later, all that type of stuff, it really dictates what roster spots are available. So I want to, instead of projecting it, I want to talk about what's in play, what those critical decisions are, and what's going to be important in sorting them out. Now, I want to start by discussing roster gymnastics. You see the Bills and other teams across the league do things to allow them maximum flexibility with the roster. So, for example, in years past, the Bills have released a player like Andre Roberts or Reed Ferguson only to sign them back the very next day. And what that allows them to do is it allows a player to make the 53-man roster. Then they put that guy on injured reserve, and then they re-sign whatever, Andre Roberts or Reed Ferguson, and they bring them right back. And so we joke around and say, hey, go wait in the parking lot until tomorrow. We'll give you a little signing bonus for your trouble, but we want to be able to manipulate this roster the best that we can. Well, the NFL adopted a new rule, okay? And it's an interesting new rule that's going to matter, and I want to bring a lot of clarity to it right now because I get a lot of questions about this, and I don't think that everyone quite grasps it yet. So let me read exactly what was amended with the IR rules. And this is from the NFL. The IR rules were amended to, quote, permit each club to place a maximum of 2 players who are placed on an applicable reserve list on the business day of the final roster reduction to be designated for return. Such players will immediately count as 2 of the club's total designations. So, on the day of final roster cuts, so Tuesday and only Tuesday, players up to 2 can be placed on injured reserve, and they can be designated for return and come back during the season. Now, there's a huge asterisk that people are missing. If you do this, they immediately count as 2 of the club's total designations that can come back from injured reserve. You're capped at 8 per season. You can bring 8 players back per season from injured reserve. That's it. And if you put a guy on this injured reserve on the day of final cuts on Tuesday, they already count. So you go, if you put 2 on, you only have 6 players you can bring back the rest of the season. If you put 1 on, then 7, right? You get that? That's a huge piece of it. And so because of that, I'm not exactly sure that you're going to not see the wait in the parking lot deals. I think that's still going to happen because that variable of them automatically counting towards the players you can bring back, noting that you can only bring back 8, I think is a critical factor. So I think you're going to see a little bit of both. And that's going to be part of the conversations we're going to have throughout this podcast. So I wanted to make sure everyone understood it right from the outset. So now let's get into it. I want to talk about what's left for Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott to sort out. At quarterback, there's a lot to sort out. Josh Allen, obviously, making the team starting quarterback. But the depth, a lot of questions. And that starts with Mitchell Trubisky. This is exactly the type of player that I'm talking about, where do you want to put him on injured reserve on that cutdown day and then automatically count him towards coming back? I don't think I would want to do that. And so what I would do, and what I think they're going to do, is Trubisky's going to make this initial roster, and then the Bills will probably claim or sign a player that was released from some other team. There's a lot of good quarterbacks. I'm loosely using the word good. There's a lot of reasonable backup quarterbacks that could potentially be released on cutdown day. And my suspicion is that the QB2 for this roster, probably not on the roster right now, because, of course, Mitch Trubisky is injured. So that's what I think could happen. Now, the Bills do have Anthony Brown and Ben DiNucci, and I think one of them is likely going to be on the practice squad as the QB3. One thing that Bruce Nolan noted in his episode of the Bruce Exclusive on Thursday morning is that Anthony Brown wasn't available when the Bills signed Ben DiNucci. So I'm not ruling out that the team might like him more. So they got to find a QB2. And look, is it maybe Ben DiNucci or Anthony Brown? Maybe. But I think it's far more likely that the Bills sign a player or even trade for a player that winds up being the QB2 with one of those two guys in the practice squad. So that's what they have to sort out. What do you want to do with Mitch Trubisky? And then from there, you got to find another quarterback probably. So there's a lot to figure out at quarterback. At running back, there's less to figure out. I think the Bills have 4 spots on their roster for running backs, and that includes the fullback. So Reggie Gilliam plus 3 running backs. Those 3 running backs, James Cook, Ray Davis, Ty Johnson. Okay. The thing that they have to figure out here is between Darrington Evans and Frank Gore Jr., which one do you want to keep on the practice squad? And to me, the more attractive player is Darrington Evans. I think he's a proven special teams player in some regards, has more athleticism, more versatility. I'm more in on Evans. But Darrington Evans has 3 accrued NFL seasons, and you can only keep 6 players with 3 or more accrued seasons on your practice squad. Do you want to burn one on a running back? That's the question that the Bills are facing. And that probably helps Frank Gore's case in being on the practice squad. Now, they could have both on there. You have 16 practice squad spots, so it's not crazy to think that both could make it. But those are the variables in play. I think that's what they have to determine. Do you want Gore, Evans, or both on this practice squad? At wide receiver, I think the Bills will roster 5, maybe 6 receivers. Again, they only rostered 5 receivers last year. I keep beating this drum, but that was it. Diggs Davis, Sherfield Hardy, and Shakir. That was it. That's all they rostered all season long. So I think 5 is in play again this season. And so I think your top 4 are very clearly Keon Coleman, Mac Hollins, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir. Those are your top 4 receivers. Not in that order. Those are the top 4. Your wide receiver 5 is Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Well, he's got a neck deal, right? And so this is another player that you go into this conversation about, well, do we go ahead and put him on injured reserve and count him towards the 8 players that we can bring back? Or do we go ahead and let him make this roster? And I think there's a really good case to be made that Marquez Valdes-Scantling should just make the roster and then just be an inactive player, right? The Bills will have to have 5 inactive players every single week. And I think even if they were all healthy, I think MVS would probably be one of them. I think in a lot of ways, MVS might be this year's Poona Ford, where you kind of see how they could fit in and factor, but ultimately there's too many limitations for them to dress with any level of frequency on game days. And if MVS is the wide receiver 5, which he is, and doesn't play special teams, and is a specialized player that wins Just as a vertical threat, there's not a lot of appeal to give him a jersey on game day when you have to have 5 inactive players. So because of that, do you just let him make the roster and he's one of your inactive players until he's healthy? Totally possible. Totally possible. So I think that's within the realm of possibilities. Then from there, do the Bills roster 6 receivers? And then if the answer to that is yes, who is it? KJ Hamler? Andy Isabella? Tyrell Shavers? The training camp hype was there for Shavers. What has he done in preseason that really changes things? Justin Shorter? Damiere Byrd? That's what I'm saying. Are you going to roster one of those players or a 5th safety or a 6th linebacker or an extra defensive lineman or an extra offensive lineman? I think it's going to be easy for me to say, yeah, those guys can chill on the practice squad, and you want to have some other players at other positions. So is it 5 or 6? If it's 6, then who and what to do with Marquez Valdes-Scantling in terms of his designation on the roster. So a lot to sort out still, right? And time is a ticking. All right, folks, on the other side of it, we're going to talk tight end, O-line, and D-line. Be sure to stick with me. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you do is fill out a brief questionnaire. That'll get you matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, let's keep it moving here. The next position is tight end, and there's stuff to figure out here. I think the Bills will roster 3 tight ends. I don't think they will roster 4. They've never rostered 4. In fact, they've rostered 2 before and not even 3. And I know that the Bills are 12 personnel heavy, but I think they're 12 personnel heavy because of Kincaid and Knox. That's why, because they have those 2 players. I think that's what it's rooted in. And so it's either the Bills have Kincaid and Knox and they run 12, or they're missing one of them and they don't run 12. So I think they're going to roster 3. Kincaid and Knox, and then obviously Quentin Morris's shoulder injury dictates this tight end 3 conversation. And Quentin Morris, I think the Bills are deciding if it's a situation where he can play through this injury or if they're going to go ahead and have surgery that's going to cost him the season. I think that's what they're trying to figure out. And so if he can play through it with bracing or whatever, then he's your tight end 3. If not, then you got to make a decision on how to designate him. If he's out, if he's going to miss the season, you're going to have surgery. Well, then injured reserve it is, and we'll see you next year. And that opens the door for either Zach Davidson or Trey McKitty to be the tight end 3. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, Zach Davidson, that's the hot name during training camp. Yeah, he's the most dynamic receiving threat, but tight end 3 isn't a receiving role. Tight end 3 is a blocking and special teams role. And if that's the case, which it is, then Trey McKitty's probably the more attractive option as a special teams player and as a blocker. So we'll see what they do there, but I'm just saying, don't be surprised if Trey McKitty is the tight end 3 over Zach Davidson. And, the other one you try to get back on your practice squad. So that's what they have to sort out at tight end. What to do with Quentin Morris, and then who your tight end 3 is between Zach Davidson and Trey McKitty. Offensive line, the Bills are in pretty good shape here. Thankfully, there's no injuries that are really in play here that's going to dictate things. The Bills will roster 9 or 10 offensive linemen, probably 10. Your 5 starters, Dawkins, Edwards, McGovern, Torrance, and Brown. I think your next 2 offensive linemen, O-line 6 and 7, Alec Anderson and Ryan Vandemark. Then I think your 2 draft picks, Tylen Grable and Cedric Van Pran-Granger, make it. There's enough promise with both of them that I don't think you have any interest in not rostering them. And then I think you have 1 spot for either Lyle Collins or Will Clapp. And I think there's a strong case for Will Clapp as the more versatile player that could play any of the three interior spots, which matters a ton. And then there's Lyle Collins, who's had a more dynamic career, but I think at this point in his career, he's probably a guard only. And that's about the worst thing you can do is be a non-starter on the offensive line and be a guard only. That's just not a good world to live in. Now, could he potentially play tackle in a pinch? Yeah, I think that'd be rough. I'd rather have Alec Anderson play tackle, and I'd certainly rather have Ryan Vandermark play tackle. And you have Tylen Grable in this scenario. I think there's a good chance that it's either Will Clapp or nobody. It's either Will Clapp or 9 offensive linemen. That's kind of how I see it. So that's the offensive line piece of this conversation. 9 or 10. And then if it's 10, is it Collins or Clapp? I think there's a heck of a case for Clapp to be the guy over Collins if Collins truly is a guard only. Let's move to the defensive side of the football. Defensive tackle, I think the Bills will roster 4, maybe 5, but probably 4. Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Austin Johnson, and Dwayne Carter. And the name here is Dwayne Carter. Not because Dwayne Carter has any threat of not making this team. He's going to make this team as a third round pick and as a guy that I think will play 20 to 30% of snaps. But do you have enough confidence in Dwayne Carter to not roster Deshaun Williams? I think that's the conversation. That's the question the Bills have to ask themselves. I've seen enough to feel pretty good about that, especially when you have the top 3 that you have in Oliver, Jones, and Johnson. And so from there, then you have some practice squad decisions to make. Do you want both Deshaun Williams and Eli Ankou? Again, those would be players with 3 or more accrued seasons. You can only keep 6 of them. Those would seem like good players to have. Like I would be interested in that. I would love to have both of them on the practice squad. I want that defensive tackle depth. But does it make sense for both of them? I think so. I'd want to hang on to him. And then there's the Gable Stevenson conversation. And I don't think he's a threat to make this roster. And I'm unconcerned if he doesn't make the practice squad. That's what I'll say. Unconcerned about that. But I know that that's an interesting player for people. So at defensive tackle, does Dwayne Carter show you enough to feel like you can only roster 4 defensive tackles? I think the answer there is probably. And you love the idea of Deshaun Williams and or Eli Ankou on your practice squad. At edge defender, I think your question here is, do you keep 5 or 6? Your locks are Greg Rousseau, AJ Epinesa, Von Miller, DeJuan Smoot. And then I think Javon Solomon's probably a lock as a cost control rookie that's shown a lot of promise this preseason as a pass rusher and as a run defender. And then from there is, do you want to roster Kingsley Jonathan? That's what it comes down to. I don't think Casey Tuhill's a serious contender here. I think he's underwhelming and he's been hurt. He'll certainly get a ton of opportunity to play on Saturday against Carolina. Cameron Klein also somewhat in this mix, although I think it's unlikely. So do you roster 6? And I think this could be a situation where it's either 6 edge defenders or 6 linebackers. And whichever one you don't keep 6, you keep 5 at the other spot. And I think what helps a player like Kingsley Jonathan is special teams. Not just being able to cover kicks and punts, but the blocking component. Blocking on these kick returns is going to be very difficult because you have to be able to sustain blocks and you got to be athletic to be able to do it. There's too much space and too much time that you have to sustain the blocks for the returner to have a chance to get past you. And I don't think you can have offensive linemen do it. I don't think they're athletic enough, but body types like a Kingsley Jonathan and athleticism like a Kingsley Jonathan helps in that capacity. So can you get Kingsley Jonathan back on your practice squad? I think that's a bit of a concern. I think he's a flashy enough of a player. In fact, a few years ago, the Bears signed him to their active roster. So I think you have a key decision to make here. I think Rousseau, Epinesa, Miller, Smoot, and probably Solomon are fine. It's what do you do with Kingsley Jonathan? That's the big piece of the puzzle to figure out for Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. All right, folks, on the other side of it, let's do linebackers, corners, safeties, and special teams. And I want to get into Tyler Bass. I know that He continues to be inconsistent, but it's a very complicated conversation. I'll break that down for you and more here on the other side of it. Be sure to stick with me. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, defensive back 7, special teams, and the Tyler Bass conversation. At linebacker, I kind of teased this a little bit. It's either 5 or 6. I think it's probably 6. The Bills have rostered 6 every single year under Sean McDermott, except for last year they rostered 6 initially, and then Balen Spector went to injured reserve. Again, I think if they do go 5 here, that opens the door to keep Kingsley Jonathan. If they go 6 here, I think that probably stiff arms Kingsley Jonathan. Now, who are the 5 or 6? That's where it gets tricky. Well, I think stone cold locks are Terrel Bernard and Dorian Williams. Okay. I think Deion Jones is probably safe because I think his ability to play both spots, the veteran that he is, I think he's an important piece of this linebacker room. I think he's probably safe. And then you have to figure out what you want to do with Matt Milano. And you have to be honest with yourself about whether or not he's going to return. And I know that that's a hard decision to make right now because you got to see how the rehab goes. But if he's going to return, then I feel extremely comfortable with him being exactly the type of player that you would use to put on IR for cutdown day. And then in December or January, whenever he's ready, you bring him back. But if there's a chance that Matt Milano won't be able to return, then I don't think you can burn that on cutdown day. I think you have to let him make the 53, then put him on injured reserve and sign somebody back. And you could see that happen with Deion Jones in particular. I could see the Bills with Matt Milano making the initial 53, Deion Jones being cut, Deion Jones waiting in the parking lot, Matt Milano to IR, Deion Jones back to the roster. Like, don't be surprised if that happens. So being a good forecaster of what's going to happen with Matt Milano is important for making the right decision here. So Bernard, Williams, probably Deion Jones. That's 3. I think you have room for 2 or 3 more. And your contenders are Joe Andreessen, Nicholas Morrow, Balen Spector, Edifwan Ulofoshio. Well, with Morrow and Spector, there's injury concerns there. Groin injury for Morrow that he's been battling. Spector, it just depends on what week it is, what injury he's facing. But it's always something. It's a hamstring right now, week to week. You put him on injured reserve. You let him make the roster and then put him on injured reserve. Ulofoshio feels like a great stash guy. Ulofoshio is exactly like put him on the Justin Shorter plan from last year. I know he's healthy right now, but I'm doing air quotes. What if his hamstring were to tighten up after the Panthers game? And you went ahead and put him on injured reserve. I think the Bills have some options there. So who's healthy? Who do you like? That's what the Bills got to figure out. And then what are the timetables for return on these injuries? But I think all of that helps Joe Andreessen. I think Joe Andreessen has the type of skill set that I think is worth keeping around based on what he's shown to this point, but also I think he's going to be terrific on special teams. And what more could you ask for in a depth linebacker? And I think the presence of a guy like Deion Jones, who could play inside and outside, gives you more of an appetite for rostering a Joe Andreessen. So plenty to sort out at linebacker. Plenty. At corner, this is the most cut and dry position group on this team, in my opinion. I think the Bills roster 6. I think it's Benford, Douglas, Johnson, Elam, Hardy, and Ingram. And that's it. I think Kyron Brown, Kenai Lovely, and Takori Couch, those guys aren't going to make this team. The only player that I think is in question is Jamarcus Ingram. If the Bills feel like they have to keep an extra player at a different position, you could see him being a bubble player, but I think the Bills are going to want him to make it. Most likely it's those 6 making it. At safety, another position with a lot of injuries. 4, I think the question is, do they keep 4 or 5? Taylor Rapp is safe. I think Cam Lewis is safe as well. And then you have this combination of Damar Hamlin, Cole Bishop, Mike Edwards. Well, is any of them hurt to the point where they need to be placed on injured reserve? And if so, when? Or do you just need to keep all those players, right? It's been kind of dicey with health. Do you just need to have all of them in the fray to give yourself the maximum hedge? And I think that's where the Jamarcus Ingram roster spot could be in jeopardy. If you need to keep all 5, then I think Jamarcus Ingram gets bumped. And you hope to get him back on the practice squad. I think the question mark here is Kareem Jackson. I certainly haven't seen much from Kareem Jackson in preseason, but I wouldn't expect to. There's certainly a long resume of game tape that you can point to that kind of tells you who Kareem Jackson is. Obviously an aging player. But is he the guy that they feel like they need to keep around? Is he a practice squad guy? I mean, he was signed in July. Or it was August. It's not like the NFL was lining up to have Kareem Jackson. It's probably a player you could probably get back on your practice squad. So Taylor Rapp, and then which mix of guys? 4 or 5? I think the injuries could make it 5, and then that would be bad news for Jamarcus Ingram, in my opinion. At special teams, Tyler Bass, Reed Ferguson, Sam Martin. I think those are your specialists. And we get practice reports every day, and Tyler Bass is missing field goals left and right? He's like 3 of 6, 4 of 6, missing multiple field goals from like 40 yards, 43 yards all the time. Very, very concerning, especially with how last season ended. I mean, he's going 4 for 6 every day. That's 66% or something like that. That's terrible. And he's not like missing long field goals. He's missing short field goals. So I know what you're thinking. Get him out of here. Well, that's complicated. Okay. First of all, there's not a lot of good kickers. There's no good kickers to sign right now. A lot of teams do have multiple kickers on their roster. And so if you're going to do something with replacing him, you're going to wait and see which players become available, because I just don't think the sample of kickers available right now is very good. And if you do this, you better be convinced that it's going to be an upgrade. That's really important. It has to be an upgrade. You don't just cut one bad kicker to go to another bad kicker, especially with the contract implications. So let me explain these contract implications. And I'm actually not going to explain them to you. I'm going to read what Matt Warren of Buffalo Rumblings wrote, because I think in these couple of sentences, he does a great job of plainly spelling out why this situation is complicated with Tyler Bass's contract. This is what Matt wrote. Currently, Tyler Bass's 2024 cap hit is $4.4 million, including his salary for the season, which is fully guaranteed. If the Bills cut him, they will still have to pay him. Also, the Bills have already paid him a $5.1 million signing bonus and a $500,000 roster bonus earlier this offseason, while $4.5 million has not been accounted for on their cap yet. All that means if they cut him, his dead cap number would be nearly $7.4 million. Granted, only $4.3 million would be applied in 2024, with the remaining $3.5 million hitting in 2025. So the Bills could fit it if their hand was forced, but the net result of cutting him and signing a minimum kicker would be to add roughly $1 million to their cap commitments in 2024 and more than $3 million next year. It's a very complicated situation. The best result would be for Tyler Bass to be the kicker that he's supposed to be. But what confidence do you have that he's going to do that? And I'm sure you feel the same way I do. You're greatly concerned that this guy's going to cost the Bills a game. He's going to miss a 40-yard game-winning field goal. I mean, 40 yards should be, this is the NFL, man. These kickers are good. These kickers are really good. He had 11 kickers last year that were 90% or better on field goals. They're really good. And yeah, it's going to be a tough pill to swallow. And boy, oh boy, do I dread that day where the Bills held on to Tyler Bass and he couldn't make from 41 to win a game. Or the other consequences of how, look, you miss a field goal, that's a possession, right? And it's hard to make that up, right? I get it. I get the value. It's very important, but you better be sure you're getting a better kicker. And you see teams with kicker problems all the time, and it carries throughout a season. And it feels like the Bills are in line to do that, which is very, very disappointing because you paid one. But acknowledge that it's not as simple as get this guy out of here, right? Well, okay, cool. Who you bringing in? And is it worth what it's going to cost you cap-wise when things are already tight? A lot in play. A lot to figure out for Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane here in the short days ahead between now and when these roster cuts are due on Tuesday by 4 p.m., which, of course, we'll talk through it all with you here on this podcast. Of course, the Panthers on Saturday, we'll do all the post-game stuff. We'll react to the final roster, and then it won't be long before we're getting ready for the Arizona Cardinals in week 1. Also, folks, I should have done this earlier, but I would love to invite you to join the Locked On Bills subtext community. So many great features with that. You get one-on-one text messaging with me. I send my first reaction to all major Bills news out to everybody, and I do my live in-game text. So pretty much after every drive, I share my thoughts with the subtext community, and you'll get that. You'll get the all-22 review clips. So many great features with the Locked On Bills subtext community. A link in today's show notes and everyday show notes for you to join. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today. Always appreciate you being here. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, share, and subscribe to the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.